Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll go hunting for Spanish coins. So you want to stay tuned for that. But first, our guest is joining us from North Dakota State University political science professor, Dr. Nick Barroth.
Thank you.
Dr. Barroth, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
As we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Dr. Nick Barroth. I teach at North Dakota State University. I'm also chair of the Department of Political Science and Public Policy, so I've come up in the world. I'm not originally from North Dakota. I'm from a town in western Pennsylvania called Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and I moved here and started teaching at NDSU, well, way back in 2004. So I might not be officially a North Dakotan, but at least with the weather lately, I should be at least an honorary North Dakotan. So.
Well, you're here today to talk about the 2022 election and political season, if you will. Let's start with North Dakota. Mm-hmm. With the tragic loss of Wayne Stingham recently, his passing, well, he'd already announced, though, that he was going to step down. But how do you see that race shaping up? And who's going to jump in, do you think?
Well, at the moment, it looks like it's Drew Wrigley's to win or lose. It sounds like he's somebody who is very interested in the position. I mean, he sort of made rumblings, if not an outright announcement. And with the seat being open, it seemed like a natural sort of shift in his political career. So he'd be the one I'd be watching closely. And also, if we get an appointment in, I don't know if we're going to rush in an attorney general appointment before the election, he would seem like a very natural choice to take that position. So, I mean, again, not a betting man, but he seems to be the one that seems to get the most mentions, is what I'm thinking.
Do you think the governor will appoint? Is there an urgency at all to fill that? Or?
Well, I mean, you never want to have an empty seat with such a thing as an important seat as Attorney General. And there's usually a requirement that you have to have it within a maximum amount of time. And I'm not sure if the election day is beyond that time, so we might have sort of a temporary person put in. But it would be quite useful for whoever would be appointed. You know, they would be the incumbent, they would have the upper hand and such. And again, in this day and age with the state involved in lots of national lawsuits, you don't want to leave that position open. You want to keep the office running, certainly, but you want to have a new person in charge. And so, again, it's going to, well, almost definitely stay in Republican Party hands. But it's one of those things that's behind the scenes, it's important, but it's also pretty prominent too. And so if you're somebody who wants to, I don't know, become a permanent feature of North Dakota politics, that's the way to go. And Stingham, I looked up his life history and such, because he had been Attorney General when I showed up, of course. And it's like I was telling my students that how far he goes back is that he replaced Heidi Heitkamp, if I'm not mistaken, which is like, you know, several generations, it feels like at this point. So in some ways, it's a passing of an era, sort of a type of North Dakota politician that, well, is maybe going away, fading away or some such. I'm not sure what's coming next, but that's sort of not very flashy, sort of stolid but competent leadership is sort of what we used to expect in a lot of these positions, even governorship. And it'll be interesting to see if that continues. You know, we usually tend to elect in the state, as far as as I've seen over history in my time here, people who I don't want to say are boring, but you know at least seem competent, seem able to do things, and don't really upset too many people, by and large, at least within the state. Outside the state, well, they have different opinions. So it will be interesting to see if this will be sort of a break, I guess, from the past. So I'm watching it closely too.
Yeah. Well, you know, with North Dakota being a very red state, Kelly Armstrong and John Hoeven, of course, are up for election, but they seem pretty strong for re-election. Or do you see the Democrats bringing somebody in to really challenge them?
Boy, that's a good question. And it's, in the state, it'd probably be very prohibitive favorites for the Republicans, Kelly Armstrong and Hoeven, to win re-election. That would be like, you know, almost like a knee-jerk reaction. I'm not expecting the Democrats necessarily to launch a successful challenge or even come close. You know, their previous attempts to get a House representative in, you know, they've gotten under 30%, you know, really low amounts for their votes. And so what I'm interested in is like, well, you know, what sort of starting lineup lineup do they have? What sort of leadership can they put forward that may be sort of doomed in the election? But at least you could say, hey, there's an alternative. I could see that person as being congressperson or senator and such. And so that's something I'm waiting for too. The last couple candidates from the Democrats, I mean, they had their positive sides, but they never seemed to capture the imagination of the public. And so it's sort of been a dead end for the Democratic Party here in the state and, well, nationally. They don't look for North Dakota to be a surprise anymore and send a congressional delegation made up of Democrats. We're pretty much in this day and age, if it's a state that goes for Donald Trump or Joe Biden in reverse, it's going to be a state that's almost certainly going to elect Republican senators. And again, one of the things I'll bring up probably time and time again is that elections in this day and age are much more nationalized at the Congress level in particular, at the House level in particular. I mean, certainly national issues were always important, but now it seems like people are voting in line with the national party. Like we want a Republican if we're a Republican district that goes for Trump and not a Democrat. So, you know, the sad story of Colin Peterson and his loss in the last time is sort of seen by some people as evidence that, you know, it's important to be competent, but in this day and age, the elections have been nationalized. So if you're if you're from a different party than what you would expect the district would support, well, it's going to be hard to stay on for very long. So,
what about the Libertarians? Can you talk about how they fared recently in North Dakota races, and do you see that party becoming a player in the state?
Well, it seemed like they were on that trek for that sort of trajectory for a while there. Like in 2020, you know, or 2016. I'm getting my elections mixed up. Oh my goodness! But in 2016, it seemed like they were on the rise. They weren't going to be maybe the #2 party and such, but they seemed like they were getting over 5% of the vote in some elections, which meant that they would be on the ballots for primaries and for general elections without all the petition gathering that they would have to do otherwise. And that sort of foothold has sort of faded. If I'm not mistaken, in the last election in 2020, the Libertarians didn't do very well. I mean, it was under 5%. I think it was like 3% or so for their member of Congress and such. And so they're, you know, I never expected them to be a winner, but they would, you know, perhaps bring on new ideas, or say, you know, if they're doing well in an election, you know, the Democrats or Republicans might sort of crib their notes from them and such. But if you're getting under 5%, that seems to be less what's going to happen. So it could be that the Libertarians, well, missed their moment. You know, that the Trump-Clinton election was going to be the time for the third party to rise and do well. And they certainly got better votes in the state, but it didn't seem to carry beyond that election. And again, it seems with nationalization of the elections that people are going to be less interested in, you know, the person or the, you know, the ideas, and more that this is the party that supports my president, or this is the party that supports the person I want to become president. So I'm going to vote from down the line. And so that's what we've been seeing more and more with voting results in North Dakota and elsewhere, is that it seems to be, you know, the idea that, well, people used to say, I vote for the person and not for the party. And it seems like that has disappeared. It's an interesting thing, and the ground has shifted under the feet of a lot of people in the last 4 or 5 years. But it's producing, you know, sort of unusual results compared to what political science used to say about American elections. So, from my perspective, all this is very interesting. And of course, whether or not, you know, Hoeven and such wins by, you know, 20 or 30 points is sort of going to be, you know, just sort of if there's an alternative put out there. And if that alternative is the Libertarian Party, we'll see this election if they can start building back a little bit. So.
Yeah. Well, you hit on this a little bit. This next question here: what really changed since the days of Dorgan, Conrad, Pomeroy, 3 Democrats in Washington? And so, what changed in North Dakota over the time?
Well, it seems as if a lot more people, again, when they cast their vote for president, that's going to decide their vote down the line. That if you're voting Republican in presidential elections, you want your party to win, your team to win, you want your party to have the most flexibility, most power in Congress. So you would vote for Kelly Armstrong because he's a Republican, and you wouldn't have to know anything about him. And that's something, it's always been a partisan thing. It's always been important. National things have been important. But we've had a real decline in terms of, you know, ticket splitting. It used to be up to 1/3 of House members were elected to Congress, and they got the support of their constituents, but the constituents would vote for the other side when it came to the president. And so you'd have a, like we used to have in North Dakota, it would very much go for Republicans across the line, but we would have our Dorgans, we would have our Pomerites, and we would have very competitive elections where Democrats used to do very well. They were seen as sort of bringing home the bacon, protecting our interests in Congress, and also pretty smart people. Well, that sort of, candidate side of things, that, the person and such, is going to be much less important now. And so right now, if you look at the nation as a whole, there's maybe 5% of all congressional districts have a person who's been elected to the office where their district supported the other side when it came presidential election. So you've had sort of nationalization. You've had people voting for the president as their primary thing, and that determines it across the line. It's again very interesting. In political science, we talk about the renationalization of elections and polarity and partisanship being key. And so we're kind of having a return to before World War II, before the New Deal even, where it much more mattered about party label and less so about whoever was behind that label. And the independents have decreased in numbers, and it's just clear that now it's being driven by again, whether you think your party should win and can win at the national level.
Well, let's move out of the state to more of the national politics. President Biden has signaled that he will nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that, and what's your opinion of that strategy?
Well, I mean, when he was running for president, Biden said he was going to pick a woman to be his vice president. And he had also mentioned that when people talk about Supreme Court justices and nominations and such, that he wanted to nominate a black woman for this position. And it sounds as if that's what he's moving through too. That's what he's going to that's what he's going to continue with that plan. And there are reasons that he's doing. He wants. He thinks that this group has been underrepresented in the Supreme Court. He thinks it gives a different perspective. There's also a political side to it as well. That his fundamental base is going to be black voters and black women voters in particular. And so, if you're doing it strictly by politics and such, well, he needs to make sure that that he's showing appreciation for this support, and that's a pretty big thing to sort of promise, Supreme Court justice and such. And of course, it's led to a lot of backlash, particularly if you're Republicans. You don't want, any Democratic elected justice to get in. And so this sort of process has been attacked that it's favoring one group versus the other, and, you should hire the best person for the job rather than to go through a checklist. Well, there are arguments made back and forth about that. What I expect will happen is once you have an actual person put out there, rather than some sort of abstraction or like, oh, these are potential candidates, that part of the argument will end, that there'll be more of a focus on whoever the person is, their background, if there's ever been any sort of trouble or anything like that, who knows when they do a background check with justice or potential justices, and also what what it seems their court decisions say about their ideology or beliefs and such. One of the things that's also, I think, a little bit underreported is that it used to be that you didn't really talk about the age of justices too much. They tended to be these stolid, elderly men mostly and such in their 50s, the late 60s, or late 50s, early 60s and such. And now there's a lot more conversation about that. You go through the list of potential justices and such, and you'll hear people say, oh, well, is this person going to be good or not and such. And one point in their favor or against them is if they're in their late 50s and such, because in this day and age, a lot of partisans are expecting that you put a justice on court, you want them to stay there for a very long time because it's hard to get that chance again. So I believe Ruth Bader Ginsburg was nominated when she was 60, and that's probably not going to happen much anymore, that a person who is, God help us, 60 years old, is seen as somebody who won't be there very long. Ginsburg was there for a very long time, but that was unexpected and isn't really typically what happens. So there's a discussion about race, which is, has its ups and downs, but there's sort of an idea that when you get these choices, you get somebody in there who's going to be there as long as possible, and that's a guiding principle for people's decision-making process.
Well, let's move on and talk a little bit about midterm elections. Mm-hmm. All signals point to the Democrats losing seats. What's your view on this?
Yeah, it doesn't look good for the Democrats right now. I mean, Joe Biden's polls are down, which is never good when you come to a midterm election, and sort of polls about who do you prefer to lead this country, Democrats or Republicans, it's about tied, or Republicans even ahead by a smidge. And that's very unusual. You know, Democrats usually do better on this sort of direct sort of polling and such. So it doesn't look good for the Democrats. And this is something that, you know, in any age would be what I would say. You know, it's like nationalization of politics, yeah, but still, whether it's 20 years ago or today, midterm elections tend to be very bad for the party of the president. The two exceptions were in '98 when you had Bill Clinton was impeached. That didn't go down very well with a lot of people. And then in 2002 after 9/11. So very unusual circumstances. And hopefully we won't be facing anything like that, but it would have to take some cataclysmic game changer for most people to think the Democrats are going to do, you know, okay, you know, maintain control of the House at the very and Senate at the very least.
Yeah, and if you see House or Senate flipping, or both even flipping, how would President Biden then have to govern over the next 2 years?
I would expect it to be very messy, because I would expect the House, which is much more likely for the Republicans to gain control of, although the Senate looks pretty good for them too, will do a lot of investigations. I mean, they could, if they wanted to, impeach Joe Biden if they wanted to. But what I expect is they'll do a lot of investigations of whether it's what's going on in the border, what's happened in Afghanistan, what's going on with COVID, that there's going to be a lot of investigations. And although people call them fishing expeditions sometimes, you can find stuff that's going to can make a politician look bad. So Joe Biden's going to have to face that. And then just trying to get certain things done, budgets passed, making sure debt ceiling's done, could be a really drag-out fight with Republicans, because you know, why would they want to go on with the president? You know, they oppose him and such. And so I would expect that you know, it'd be a lot of, and you know, getting people appointed to office. You know, so far Biden's done quite well getting his court picks put onto the courts and such. And that requires at least, you know, a working majority in the Senate. And if the Senate gets, you know, Republicans take it over, that's going to end. So you'll have a president who'll be struggling to get anything done, and probably have to do most of his big initiatives through executive orders. And so, you know, executive orders will suddenly become a preoccupation of people who watch the presidency. And where that will go, well, that will be, that will be something to see indeed.
Yeah. One Virginia representative, Abigail Spanberger, said that Biden was elected to, quote, stop the insanity and be a grown-up, not to be transformative like FDR or maybe LBJ. What do you think of that analysis and the theory that he may be overreached on progressive proposals?
Well, there's something to that, because the thing is that the problem is that if you're overreaching but you get it done, that's one sort of stuff that you can be, you know, praised, forgiven for, you know, cursed. But if you try stuff and it doesn't get passed, like the Build Back Better bill, overreach makes you look like a failure. I mean, most people, when they were looking at Joe Biden coming in and seeing a 50-50 margin in the Senate and the tightness in the House, and if you said that, okay, they're going to pass, you know, COVID care, they're going to pass some bills having to do with infrastructure and a few other things, that would be looked at as fairly successful. But there was a sense by Democrats, my understanding is that this was probably going to be their shot for a while, that controlling the House and the Senate's a difficult thing to get, along with the presidency. And so if you have big plans, this is the time to get it in there. Well, that's been a mixed bag, to say the least, and it's made President Biden, well, look bad. And if you're thinking about perhaps the turning point in the presidential sort of his approval ratings and his ability to get things done, it probably wasn't even the Build Back Better stuff, much as the fiasco that's turned out so far. It's probably the leaving Afghanistan. And leaving Afghanistan as a general principle was popular, particularly if most people were expecting it was done in an orderly manner. But the way in which it was carried out made the Biden administration look incompetent. And if you look at all the polling results, you know, whether people think Biden's doing a good job, whether they think the economy's doing well, whether they think Biden's doing well with COVID, right about that time last summer, you had a sudden drop of like at least 5 percentage points more and such. That sort of undercut his claim of competency, and that's probably been the thing that's really impacted him more than everything else. It's not, people don't talk about Afghanistan anymore, but that feeling is still still there. And then you have stuff like inflation and the messiness of the end of COVID as it's hopefully coming up. And suddenly you have a president who looks like he's floundering around. Although, to be fair, there are a lot of big problems to be taken care of by the federal government right now. So, it would be tough for anybody in office. But, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen.
Well, let's get your crystal ball. We're almost out of time. Will Donald Trump and Joe Biden, will that be the ticket in 2024?
Well, I would expect almost definitely that unless there's some unusual scandal, some health thing or whatever, it sounds like they both really want to be president. Biden spent decades trying to become president, and Trump, well, he still talks about being president. He's probably the most influential ex-president that I've seen in my lifetime. So, I mean, unless somebody's really playing good at bluffing here, it looks like they're really gearing up for both of them to run again.
And real quick, if Biden and Trump don't run, who do you see stepping in?
DeSantis, it looks like from Florida governor, hopefully I'm not mispronouncing his name, but he looks like he's really setting himself up for a run, even if Trump runs, or at least has that potential. So that would be, a starting point, I think. I think the Florida governor's sort of put himself in a good place. On the Democratic side, it looks a little bit more like a free-for-all, because a lot of the people who ran in 2020, it's probably they're getting the end of their presidential ambitions, Sanders in particular and such. And so who knows, maybe this whole shuffling would end up with a President Klobuchar or some such. Would be, again, a big plot twist that I wouldn't see coming out anywhere, except I just thought of it now. So it would, but such a scenario could be possible because nobody would be the front runner.
Well, 2024 is a long way away and a lot of things can happen. Real quick, January 6th committee in the House. Can you talk about what you think about what's going to happen with people being charged with the crime from January 6th?
It's interesting watching that because it seems like it's a committee doing a lot of work, and it's, they're doing it above board, but a lot of it's behind the scenes. Like it seems to a lot of people to be like, oh, that's boring, that's been done and such. And the polls are like, people aren't all that interested, the voters. But a lot of people in the House and Senate are. And you see over in the Senate, some Republican senators have mentioned that they are watching closely what's going on and that it is important to them and that they're not going to impeach Trump again, but that the story that comes out of it might be a little bit more impactful than we expect. But again, crystal ball time, it could all fade away as well.
Well, I wish we had more time. We'll bring you back sometime when we get closer to elections, maybe. If people want more information, where can they go?
Well, I mean, always go to, good news sources, but the one that I've been enjoying lately is 538, which is it's 538.com. And it's a website that keeps track of polls, all sorts of polls for Biden and Congress and such. And I find it to be a useful sort of update of what new polls came out and how they sort of tie in with other polls to get a sense of, well, is Biden going up or down with his ratings? And, well, spoiler alert, he's been going down.
Okay. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Stay tuned for more. In this Artifact Spotlight, treasure hunter Terry Shannon informs us about Spanish coins he's found on the Treasure Coast of Florida.
Hi, I'm Terry Shannon. I'm a treasure hunter, and this is my Artifact Spotlight. These are Spanish coins. These are, this is a 8 real, and these are what they call cob coins. In 1715, down at the Treasure Coast, there was a fleet of 11 Spanish treasure ships that come up along the coast, and a hurricane caught them, and all 11 of them sank. And out of the 11 that sank, they've only found 6, and the average salvage has been 41 million per ship. And these are the coins that they were carrying to take back to Spain. When they went back to Spain, these would be melted down and turned into regular coins. They were shipping so much silver over, they did it the easiest and fastest way. So they'd have a bar of silver, or they'd pour out a strip of silver, and then they'd whack off about 1 ounce. And then the slaves would stamp them. They had the cross on the one side and the shield on the other side. Every coin is different, but they're all the correct weight. So an 8 real is 1 ounce of silver. This would be a 4 real, which would be a ½ ounce of silver. And this is a 2 real, and that would be a 1/4 ounce. A 1 real is 1/8 of an ounce of silver. and a half riel. They're just a very small coin, and that would be 1/16 of an ounce. What they did is they had an assayer that would check every coin, and they would weigh it, so the weights are spot on. And if you looked at these coins, you'll see where they shaved off the extra. So in other words, when this one was cut off and it was stamped, it was too heavy, so they shave it off to get it down to the proper weight. And that's why very seldom you will find a cob coin with a date on it. And they used to cut these coins to make change. You've heard of the expression pieces of 8. That's where that come from. It's the same thing for the gold coins. They're called escudos. And the 8 escudo is 1 ounce of gold. The 4 escudo is a half ounce. The 2 escudo right on down. They went down to a 1 escudo. They didn't have a half escudo. They did later on when they started making the round coins. These other coins here, these are called marvedis. And they're called pirates coins. Everybody calls them a pirates coin. They're made out of copper. They don't have a lot of value. They're all different. They're very rough and crudely stamped. This is, I believe it's called a Carlos and Juana Spanish coin, and it's a 2 real. And if you look on the front here, it'll have an M, meaning it was minted in Mexico. G, that's for the assayer. And we were able to date this coin by the assayer. And in the records, he only worked from 1544 to 1548. They believe this is probably the oldest coin ever found on the Treasure Coast. If not the oldest, it's one of the oldest. When I got this one, I got 2 of them. And the other one, it doesn't have much detail. When a ship sank with a lot of silver, the salt water causes like an electrolysis effect, and they'll get a coating over them they call coin silver. And if you can get that off, oftentimes you can get this pattern back, and that's what they're trying to do with that other coin. It's quite a treasure. There's a lot of people that have detected the Treasure Coast for many, many years and have yet to find one. So I've been real lucky. I've done really well.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Post for this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4, 2008. And by the members of Prairie Public.